We need like a drum roll.
There we go. I think we're live. Okay, brilliant. Hello, everybody. Oh, everyone's already there. Alrighty. Okay, beautiful. Everyone's in. Hello, everyone. Please drop a note on where you're joining from today. We'd love to understand where everyone's coming from. Welcome to Meaningful Montessori, putting pedagogy into practice. We are going to kick off. We've got a really exciting day today. Thank you, everyone, for the flexibility on the reschedule, and we're really excited to host this today. Before we sort of kick off, just want to do a quick acknowledgement of country. So we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we work and live on, honouring their elders past, present and emerging. We respect the deep connections Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have with country and commit to learning from their wisdom as we build our shared future. Now, for those of you that don't know, we're Mana. We are committed to ensuring every child has an extraordinary start to life. We've been doing a series of these webinars every week, really to just, I guess, share more best practice knowledge to uplift the sector. I know that, ECE, it's been a bit of a tough period for us all over the last little while, and we're really keen to bring that positive energy and spirit and highlight some of the awesome work that we know you're all doing day in and day out. So on that note, we're very grateful to have the lovely Jess Langford here with us. So Jess is the co-owner of SA Montessori, which is a family of 7 Montessori early learning centres across Adelaide, South Australia. It was founded in 1989 by Jess's mum, Barbara Langford. And so Jess sort of grew up in the services, has worn every role, done every job, and is one of the most passionate people I know about Montessori. Jess has mentored over 100 educators and developed nationally recognised resources like Montessori and the NQS and Montessori and the EYLF. And that's now used in more than 170 centres across Australia. She also recently received the 2025 Innovator Award at Montessori Australia for her contributions to Montessori education. And they recently just won, and this is going to be a mouthful for me, Intergenerational Program of the Year at the Australian Institute for Intergenerational Practice for their Echoes Montessori Centre, which if you haven't had a chance to check it out, it's awesome little intergenerational village, which combines the knowledge of our, wise people and our, young people as well. Mm-hmm. So Jess, big thank you for joining today. We're so grateful to be able to learn from you.
My pleasure. It's so wonderful to be here and exciting to learn with you. We're all on this learning journey. So it's very exciting to be able to have this dialogue. Having critical reflection is such a big part of our quality practice. And so having an opportunity to do that with you is really fantastic. And to do that with a bit of an audience is really wonderful too. I'm sure we'll get some great questions and interaction happening there. I just want to echo what you said to just say thank you to everyone for your flexibility around the timing. Really means a lot that we were able to reschedule to accommodate a personal emergency that had come up in my family. And I also think that's quite appropriate because, again, we're in a caregiving profession. We are here always to look after the children in our care and their families. We give so much of ourselves and kind of pour from our emotional cup into those who need it most. And I'm really grateful that everyone gave me the opportunity to stop and actually have a need of my own that had to be fulfilled. And I hope it's a reminder for everyone that it's okay when you need to do that too. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So there will be times in your professional life where you have to pop a boundary in place or ask for a little bit of grace or flexibility in order to protect your own well-being too. And you shouldn't ever be afraid to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. No, and we've got some great, people joining from everywhere. We've got Perth, Christchurch, Brisbane, Adelaide, your home turf. We're really looking forward.
Do you know what's fun? I can't see what you're seeing. I don't know where you're looking at that because it's not on my screen. So I trust you. I believe there could be nobody listening, and you're just being very kind to me. But I trust you.
No, trust me. I wouldn't lie to you. And for everyone that maybe doesn't know me, I'm Hayden. I'm the head of partnerships here at Mana. So I guess before we kick off, just a couple of housekeeping things. So just in the chat on the right of your screen, you'll see this little chat button. Hope that's where you'll see the people coming in. So feel free to, we're really keen to hear your questions. So please use the chat to do that. You can upvote your favorites with a like or a heart or a hands celebration thing. And what we just ask is that you really keep the chat positive. We really want to bring that, solution and positive sort of mindset to this session. These recordings...
Please don't heckle me.
yeah, that's my job. We will have these recorded, so you'll be able to watch them afterwards, and we'll have a couple polls throughout the session, which will just really help us get a sense of the room. So we actually might start with a poll, just to start it off, get a sense of how well do you educate? I should say you're, not you. Hopefully you can see that on the screen. And that's covered me up there. Cool. Would love to kind of get a sense of where people are in the room on helping their educators and building their service around the Montessori philosophy. Would love to get a sense of that. So we've got a few coming in, a few developing, some embedded, some emerging. Cool. So the majority still building the consistency. That's really good to hear. Awesome. Well, I might take that one down. We've got a few coming in. Let it go. Okay. So most in the developing part. That's awesome. And none in the leading and innovating part. So hopefully we can start to edge towards that side of the spectrum after today's session. So thanks everyone for responding to that. I'll put that one away. Awesome. Great. Well, the first question is, Jess, you've had such an interesting background, obviously growing up in the services. And I suppose, what made you fall in love with Montessori? Was it forced down your throat? What made you fall in love and stay in love with it? That would probably be my first question.
That's a really interesting question for me, because I, obviously having been effectively born into Montessori, my mum's approach to parenting is very much informed by Montessori principles. And I was 2 years old when I started at her first centre, Jess Scott Montessori. It's literally named after me and my brother, Jess Scott. It's Jess and Scott. And we fought for years because he thinks it's unfair that I come first, and I think it's unfair that he gets his whole name in and I've only got one syllable. So, I was 2 years old when I started at Jess Scott, and then obviously the way through my childhood, the way mum was raising us was very much informed by Montessori. And so for a lot of educators who come into Montessori, they might have one inciting incident. They might be able to point to a particular moment in their life where they discovered Montessori and say, yes, that's when I fell in love with it. I was doing my uni degree and we were doing this unit around educational theories, and I read about Maria Montessori and it was so inspiring, and that was when I fell in love and wanted to learn more. Or, I'd been teaching for 10 years in non-Montessori settings, and then one day I went for an observation visit at this Montessori classroom and I just went, yes, this is it. This is for me. I don't have a moment like that because I don't remember a time before Montessori, and I don't have a life without it being part of my identity. And when we're children, we're primed to be building our understanding of the world around us, right? And the first place that we do that is with our family and our own culture. And when we're little, we think that our world, the world that we're familiar with, is the world. We sort of think the way it is in our family is the way it is in all families, and the traditions or norms of our culture are traditions and norms for everyone. And the older we get and the more experience and exposure we have, the more we realize, oh, okay, there are different ways of being and different ways of having a family, and we start to kind of expand our understanding. So for me, I guess the point that I fell in love with Montessori was when my worldview was expanding enough to understand that it was something different at all, that it wasn't just the norm, that not every single parent spoke to their child with the kind of respect and scaffolding and support that mum offered to me, that not every child's opinion was valued and independence was supported in the way that mine was, and it was for my brother. So the older I got and saw these different types of family relationships, the more I understood that mum's kind of approach to parenting was unique, and I became very grateful for that. So that's probably the first little seed where I was like, oh, this parenting approach is wonderful. It makes me feel really positive as a child and as a human being. So thanks. And Montessori informs that. So that's fantastic. Secondary to that is that when my niece came into my life, she's now 24, but when she came into my life, I was then in a position as a then 15-year-old of needing to learn how to support her. And that was the point where I started to explore Montessori with a little bit more structure, not just in terms of, oh, this is what my mum does, but now this is something I would like to do to kind of pay it forward and be able to support my niece. So I need to have a better understanding of that consciously to know what I'm doing here. So I started to do a little bit more reading and engage with Maria Montessori's texts, The Secret of Childhood and the Montessori Method, and started to go, wow, like this is even cooler than I realized. This is fantastic. And it was not long after that I then started volunteering and then eventually teaching in one of Mum's classrooms, which initially was Jescott, that little preschool that I'd gone to as a little girl. So, it kind of felt like a very full circle moment. And when I went into that classroom, I think that was probably when it really hit me of how powerful this methodology is. And the more that I learned, the deeper that I fell in love with it. I also, being a bit of a natural contrarian, went out to kind of disprove it. I did equally a lot of reading to try to say, like, I don't want to just default into this because it's what I know or what I'm familiar with. I don't just want to be on autopilot because it's what my mum does. I am my own person. I'm going to set out and find out for myself different ways of doing things. And absolutely, when I did that, there are amazing perspectives that have enriched my practice and enriched my knowledge. But I had a really hard time disproving Montessori, if you like. And even when I account for confirmation bias, that yes, I'm not entirely objective, I had an emotional investment. But even so, when I went out and did reading, there was so much that other forms of best practice around child development were echoing what Maria Montessori herself had said, or even, modern research was reinforcing things that she had observed and intuited. And so the more that I tried to disprove, the more that it felt like actually it was reiterating those key messages. And I thought, wow, she was prognostic. She saw so much and kind of anticipated things that we're just now catching up with modern research. So that was probably where that sense of love for it really came full circle, of me realizing this is not how it is for everyone. This is something unique and special. The more I learn about it, the more I appreciate it. And even if I try to learn what's wrong with it, that's so little, and there is so much that's right about it.
No, that's great. That's a fascinating story. And I think in true Maria Montessori fashion, that contrarian within you to try and which is really cool. And I guess, would love to, because often people do have quite a surface level understanding of Montessori, and they might just associate it with particular materials, which is obviously very visible and present. What are some, I guess, the invisible things that sit behind that? Maybe a couple of the key ones that you kind of really stress to people around the Montessori difference.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that makes Montessori so unique, is that it is very holistic. It's multifaceted, it's comprehensive. So as you say, most people who think of Montessori, they're initially thinking about the materials. They've got the image of the iconic pink tower in their head. There's something that they associate as a tangible material. So the materials are really obvious, but beneath the materials, there's the curriculum. So there's a scope and a sequence, and not just the order in which we'll do it, but why that order is there. There's a lot of rationale that goes into, if a child is using this material in this way, it means they've mastered these skills, they're showing this interest, therefore they would move on to the next material as kind of either a vertical extension of kind of going to the next step of something more challenging, or as a lateral connection where now we can take this understanding and apply it in a different context. So there's that kind of curriculum that goes into it. But again, then even deeper, we've got the practices. So the way that a Montessori educator engages in the classroom, the way that they hold themselves, communicate with the children, the way that the how, I suppose, of the way that they're showing up in the classroom. And that ties into the curriculum and the materials, of course, that with our iconic pink tower, we don't just plop it down and start building blocks. There's a really deliberate presentation that goes into the way that we would role model this for a child, the way we would then observe the child and interact with them during that presentation, and right down to things like, we're very big on not correcting the child during their experience with the materials. We want to allow them the opportunity to self-correct. We want to observe what they know without our intervention, and we don't want to dampen their enthusiasm. So we're not going to correct them because that little bit of kind of embarrassment or hesitation might then change their motivation to engage with that material again, or their confidence in a broader sense. So there's all these really very specific nuances to the practice that we're engaging in the classroom. And underlying that practice, at the foundation of it all, is philosophy. So there is a really specific worldview, if you like, not just the way that we look at children, but the way that we look at learning, the way that we look at culture, the way that we look at life itself. And within Montessori, we often say it's preparation for life. We are helping these children to feel empowered for the realities of a lifetime of learning and experience and social interaction. So really that philosophy is why we do what we do. And so all of those practices are informed by the philosophy, and the reason that the curriculum is structured in a certain way is informed by that worldview, those beliefs around child development, and the materials have been designed to align with that philosophy too. For instance, the philosophy views the child as such a capable, constructivist learner, and so the materials are designed that, yes, the teacher might give a presentation, but they don't have to. The materials are what Maria Montessori called auto-educational, in that going and engaging with those materials completely spontaneously and completely independently will still give that child a really meaningful learning experience, because we believe that philosophy that children are capable learners. So these kind of four elements are completely integrated and dependent on one another, but the philosophy and the practice is probably the part that sometimes goes unseen a little bit, while people focus on, yes, I've gone out and I've bought a curriculum guide, and so now I have, all of these lesson presentations in this book, and I've gone and I've bought all the materials and I've put them on the shelf, so now I'm doing Montessori. And you just can't do Montessori without understanding the practice and the philosophy, because that is the reason why, and it's how. So popping the materials on the shelf doesn't mean you've ticked the box and now you're a Montessori setting. I actually personally think it's the other way around. I think it's a lot more authentic to be a Montessori setting that has all of that philosophy in place. You're following those really authentic practices, but you haven't bought a single material yet. Fine. There are Montessori schools in emerging parts of the world that absolutely do not have the formal Montessori materials in their classroom, but are incredibly authentic Montessori environments, having a hugely meaningful impact on children because they've got those philosophies and practices in place.
That's awesome. So yeah, love that. Philosophy, practices, curriculum, materials, and I guess how they're all interweaved. And I think whenever you're looking at something so deep like this that's been formed over years, like understanding the why is like the most important to actually getting it. And I remember last time when you did a presentation for us on kind of Maria Montessori and her history as a person and the context in which she developed this, I think is so important to actually help grasp the philosophy. Would you be able to give us maybe a short overview of kind of how this philosophy came to be? What was the context surrounding it, and why was that so interesting and impressive at the time?
I can give you an overview, but will it be short? I can't make any promises. I am a massive Montessori nerd. As I said, this is like a lifelong learning journey for me, and I kept falling deeper and deeper in love with it. And that applies to not just the methodology, but to Maria Montessori herself. She is a really iconic woman. She is a really incredible role model, not just for educators, but for peacemakers, for human beings, for feminists. She's a fantastic person to learn more about. So it's probably easy for people to assume, since Montessori is an approach to education, it's probably easy for people to assume, oh, Maria Montessori was a teacher. She was an educator. Maybe that's what she trained to do. Maybe that was her dream. But that's just not the case. She was a doctor. So she was the first female in Italy to complete medical school. And she did that absolutely against the odds and against societal expectations and against very entrenched pressures. I think my favorite story of the strength that she showed in doing that is that obviously as part of a medical degree, you need to dissect cadavers. You're engaging with learning about anatomy that way. And the medical school would not allow her to do that alongside her classmates because some of her, obviously male classmates, had complained that they did not feel comfortable to do the cadaver dissection with a female present because the cadaver is naked. So they were a little bit squeamish, a little bit sensitive about the idea of having to do this medical work if there was a female with them. And so the school decided, well, in that case, obviously the logical thing to do is to say that the males can do their work during the school hours, and then now one female student can come in alone out of hours in the dark to the mortuary and conduct her dissections alone. Now, I can't be sure of this, but I'm pretty confident that the expectation there was she won't do it. And therefore, this will be a way to get her out. We've kind of had to let her in. There's been enough of a push here. She's here now, but this might be a way to edge her out. This kind of systemic pressure is going to get her out without us having to overtly say it. But Maria Montessori was not to be underestimated. She went in alone, out of hours, in the dark, and did the work. And so she became the first female doctor in Italy, and she defied expectation, and she was able to work against the odds and against immense pressure to do that. And she continued to do that in her work with children. So when she opened what was called the Casa dei Bambini, the children's house in San Lorenzo in Rome, that was considered, the language used at the time was a slum area. Obviously, we would not use that kind of language at this point in time, but I choose to use it to again point out that she was working against entrenched value judgments and societal expectations, that it was considered a slum. And the children in that region who were coming into her children's house also were considered words that we would not use in this day. And some of those I'm not going to use because I don't even want to repeat them. But again, they were viewed socially as hopeless. That effectively these were children who were incapable of learning, who weren't going to be in traditional school settings because they weren't capable. They didn't have the intellectual capacity to be in a mainstream setting. And it was for that reason that Maria Montessori was given the opportunity to work with them, because there were essentially no expectations. It was treated almost like a science experiment, that people did not expect that these children would be going into a classroom to learn. It was about how do we look after these children who sort of can't go into a traditional setting. So Maria Montessori placed them into the children's house and she observed them. She came with no preconceived expectations of, I have a curriculum, I am going to teach them this. She just observed them first. And she identified their needs, and importantly, and using what we would talk about now in modern terms, she identified their strengths. So she looked at what these children could do, their capabilities, their potentials, not looking at them from that deficit model that society was viewing them through. And she started to experiment, and she started to introduce materials to the room to see how the children would respond. Importantly, she started to help them with practical skills. So again, you need to imagine this is 1907 in a slum area with children who were seen as very disadvantaged. So even things like basic hygiene were not in place for them. So these children were coming in each morning, with dirty faces, unwashed hands. So the first thing she would do is she gave them each a little cloth and helped them learn how to wipe their own faces and how to wash their hands. And of course, at this time, wouldn't have been a plumbed in sink. There would have been a little ceramic basin with a jug, and it was beautiful. She gave them something beautiful to do this with so that they could go through this little ritual of preparing themselves. And what she did in providing them with those tools and those opportunities is she helped to restore their dignity. Something as fundamental as you deserve to come into this place feeling clean and fresh and able to do those things for yourself. If other people do not feel that you deserve them, you have the capacity to do that for yourself. So from those most fundamental perspectives of respect for human dignity, she started to build this approach. And so she continued to observe, she continued to introduce things. And what happened within that space is that those children started to learn and achieve above the traditional schools of the time. So these children that society had given up on, that nobody expected anything of, not only are they learning, but they are learning more effectively than students in mainstream schools. So this started to garner a lot of attention, both nationally and internationally. And that was kind of the inciting point for then Maria Montessori to become an advocate for not just the children in her own children's house, but to train other educators to become a very powerful orator. She gave a lot of really stirring speeches, to the UN, in front of policymakers. She really traveled the world to advocate for children and for their rights. And she referred to children as the forgotten citizen. And her role, she felt, was to ensure that their rights were restored and that the respect for them was enshrined. So I just find that whole kind of story so powerful, not just in helping us understand the foundation of the Montessori methodology, but also appreciating this absolute pioneer of a human being for who she was. And, you know, I think within the Montessori movement, sometimes there can be a little bit of a tendency from a certain cohort to become so passionate that maybe they become a little bit too rigorous or even religious. And sometimes that can result in Maria Montessori being treated a little bit like a deity. You know, she's put on a pedestal, or she's treated as this, you know, wise God that gave us all of this knowledge, and we must sort of treat her words as gospel. But I actually think it's so much healthier and much more interesting to think of her as a human being, a flawed, fallible human being who smoked at her desk, which is, you know, I've been to her study in Amsterdam. She's got the ashtray still sitting on the desk. You know, she was this real human woman sitting at her desk, smoking cigarettes while changing the world. And I just find that so inspirational as a human being, that we don't have to be flawless or infallible or all-knowing or all-powerful. We just have to be really passionate and really engaged in what we do, and willing to take up the opportunities that are afforded to us, even if there are some obstacles along the way, so that we can make a difference and advocate for children. And I think I'll finish I told you it wouldn't be short. I finished my summary with the way that Maria Montessori herself described it, which is she did not see herself as kind of the inventor of this method. She said, I have taken what the children have shown me and I have expressed it. That is what we call the Montessori method. So if Maria Montessori was here herself to say it, she'd be saying, it's, you know, it's not my method, it's the children's method.
That's awesome. I've got goosebumps hearing that story. I've heard it before.
Are you sure it's not just goosebumps imagining going into the mortuary alone at night?
Yeah, that sounds freaky. That would have deserved me for sure. But I think, I think it's such a great story, you know, because I think in society we do still face this narrative of babysitting, and she faced that even more and has started to pave the way for that. Like, you know, and I think it's just a real symbol of like, this is so much more than that. And I think to your point, you know, because one thing I often find interesting in our sector is a lot of the names that we talk about are quite, you know, old people that, you know, Piaget, Vygotsky, and it's like, well, we're in a new era. So things have to have evolved. And so rather than, I'm doing it as Maria Montessori did it, like that's not how she would have wanted it
Absolutely.
to be expressed. And I think it's about how do we take those first principles, which tend to remain the same throughout humanity, but they change with new contexts. And I think, and I know, you know, obviously that was during the Industrial Revolution period, which also had an influence on her, and I guess some of that work ethic as well. And so I'm really curious to hear, like, when you went into your Maria Montessori contrarian mode, what were some of the things that you looked to, I guess, see what they would look like in more of a modern setting? What's kind of been your own take on that you found to be more contextually relevant for today's world?
Oh, that's a brilliant question. When I started to explore a little deeper, one of the things that was happening in the background was that I was working with children and families, and I was talking with prospective parents and also our enrolled families about their observations, if you like, what they were seeing in the classroom. And so sometimes when I was doing that deeper research or looking for those other perspectives, it was to challenge myself to make sure I wasn't just delivering the Montessori answer to those questions, but that I was looking at it from a much more kind of holistic lens. I think probably one of the biggest ones that kept coming up that you've touched on really nicely there is this idea of the work of the child, that in Montessori, we tend to use the word work. And that is a bit divisive. And it is visceral for some people, their reactions to it. So for educators coming into a Montessori classroom, or for parents who are joining a Montessori preschool or school community, hearing their child's experiences being referred to as work means different things to different people. And some people find that a really challenging phrase because for some of us, from an adult perspective, we think of work as structured and necessary and maybe even a chore. There are those of us who are lucky enough that our work is our calling and it's our passion and we genuinely derive joy from it. But there are also a lot of people for whom work is an economic necessity. Work is something you do because you have to do it, not because you necessarily want to do it. And so hearing an educator talk about their child's work in the classroom can be quite confronting for some parents. And it can certainly be confronting for some educators, particularly those who have worked for a period of time and then come into a Montessori classroom, to go from talking about play to work. And that was something where I would be asked about it and find myself delivering the rote Montessori response. I knew what the response was. Which in essence is that the play is the work of the child and the child's work is play. These words in a true Montessori sense are interchangeable. They are synonymous. They refer to the same process, the same experience. The child is working when they play because their work is to build themselves through hands-on experience. And the child is playing when they work because their activities are joyful and they are self-motivated to engage with them. So that was the answer I would give. And I still very much believe that. I still absolutely do believe that when understood and applied correctly, the use of the word work is very respectful to the child. It's saying your experiences, your explorations, your experimentations, that's not just play. It is work. It is meaningful. It is purposeful. You are doing it for a reason. It has this benefit and this outcome to it. Because just as the word work can have negative connotations for adults, the word play carries certain expectations too. And for a lot of adults, they do have kind of a hierarchical thought structure around that play is something frivolous or, it's something that is optional. You don't have to play. It might be nice to play, but it's not necessary to play. Like work is necessary. So again, there are values judgments that go into these words that mean different things to different people. So I do continue to believe that when understood, and again, we come back to that philosophy, when the philosophy is understood in a Montessori setting, that play is synonymous with work, that we're not actually differentiating or placing a value judgment on it. We're using these words interchangeably, and we use the word work to give respect and weight and significance to the child's play. I still absolutely maintain that that's very valid and valuable. However, when I did that sort of wider reading, I did learn about, types of play and play schemas and things that maybe were not as fully understood or fully articulated within the Montessori philosophy, that I do think it's very valuable for a Montessori educator or any educator to know about, that there are different types of play and each type of play has its own benefits and purpose. And that I think there is a little bit of a risk that for some Montessori educators, if they get too narrow with their thinking about what constitutes play and work, maybe they might omit some of those other forms of play and not give them the same respect. And I think the place that I see that most frequently is going into Montessori settings where there's become, unfortunately, a bit of a delineation at the threshold of the door between work happens inside and play happens outside. And what I mean by that is that those educators sometimes protect the sort of work cycle within the classroom as this is the time when we're doing independent lessons and presentations from the educator and small group activities, and we're using the Montessori materials. And then when we go outside, that's going to be unstructured, free play where children are doing imaginative role play and running around and playing sports and doing all of these other things. And I think in the most authentic understanding of the way that Montessori approached play as the child's work, I would like us to see no difference between those two contexts and no distinction between the types of activities that happen in them. I understand that obviously certain types of physical activity, for instance, lend themselves to an outdoor setting rather than an indoor setting, but I would like the indoors to be just as playful, and I would like that outdoor unstructured play to be viewed as just as significant in terms of the child's work of building themselves, and not kind of see that delineation happening between them. So that's an area where I think there is ongoing room for, I guess, refinement and constantly revisiting those core tenets of the philosophy to make sure that Montessori educators, no matter how experienced they are, don't lose touch with what is meant when we talk about the child's work, and don't start to let, bias or value judgments creep into the way that we observe classroom activity as a result.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, such a great answer. I think, I think even from my perspective of, starting to understand Montessori in more depth, I think, and I think that aligns with capital, there's this focus on like productivity, but it's really, it's about human potential and being engaged in what you're doing. And I think, particularly, now in a world, and I'm more of an AI geek, but the AI world where we will see jobs change in the future that we go into, not doing manual kind of desk jobs that maybe were part of the Industrial Revolution, which is work. And that will force people to not just be in a box doing something that someone told you was productive, but actually doing something that is realizing your potential and finding what's that human side to it. So I really find that interesting to this future around how do we take that philosophy around engagement, potential, that then will funnel through to the rest of their lives. And I think having that distinction, work in the room and then play outside is very like Industrial Revolution, 9 to 5. Then my life starts, which is like that whole concept is changing, and we're seeing that more and more now, where people want to live lives that are fully meaningful in every sense. And I think helping people see how the Montessori philosophy can be used to help with that, I think is awesome.
And I think that's such a key point. You've touched on the fact that particularly with AI, but all sorts of emerging technologies, we have no idea what the future looks like for the children that we're caring for today. So we have a generation of children where, asking the question, what do you want to be when you grow up, is a bit redundant. Like we don't know what jobs will be available to them. We don't know what social infrastructure is going to look like at that time. There is so much rapid change that's happening. And so I think what I love about Montessori is that it, again, as I mentioned earlier, prepares children for life, and not for life as we know it, but for life as they find it and for life as they create it. And when I was sort of moving through my 20s, and I'd been teaching in Montessori for quite a while, I started to engage with positive psychology. And I know that's something you've got a lot of interest in as well, and much more deep knowledge than myself in many ways. So, I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. But within the positive psychology movement, when I started to learn around the significant theorists there and the modern researchers making an incredible impact in the field of scaffolding well-being, not just allowing us to combat mental illness, which is sort of the domain of traditional psychology, but actively approaching human flourishing. What are the conditions to make us not just survive, but thrive? The more that I read about positive psychology, the more I went, wow, there is a lot of overlap here with Montessori. There is a lot of these key principles of positive psychology that I'm going, hang on, that's what we do. That's our practice there. And so, for instance, one of the things that has long separated Montessori from more traditional models of education is that we are very protective of intrinsic motivation. So what that means is that we are actively fostering the child's sense of being self-directed, of following their own interests, and of actually listening to their sort of inner compass of what do I feel excited about? What do I want to engage with? What am I drawn towards? That intrinsic or internal motivation. What can happen for particularly very young children who are really oriented towards attachment with adults, right? We know that they're seeking connection with us. They trust us. They are, emulating us in everything that we do, for better or for worse. They really want to connect with adults. And so when we are thinking about the way that we engage with them, our words are incredibly powerful. And the feedback that we give children can, albeit unintentionally, interfere with their intrinsic motivation, because no matter how motivated they might be towards a particular interest, they're motivated even more than that to connect with the adults around them, especially in those early years. Those attachments are everything. So as a small example, but one that is really significant and one that's quite, again, unique to Montessori, we don't do praise. So we don't say, good job, good girl, good boy, great work. And I don't know if you noticed, but even when I said those things, I have to kind of put on an act to do it. I'm kind of doing like an exaggerated role play there, because it does not come naturally to me. As someone who was born and raised with a Montessori mum and went straight into a Montessori classroom professionally, it feels so unnatural to me for it to come out of my mouth. Oh, good job. You know, it's just not something that I would say to a child. It's not my kind of default setting. But there's a lot of rationale behind that. So, you know, again, as soon as we introduce that kind of praise, what that is extrinsic motivation. It is an external carrot, if you like, a kind of reward or a bit of bait dangling in front of the child, that as soon as we start to offer that praise, it can interfere with what they might have been naturally interested in or motivated to do. And now maybe that's a little bit more oriented towards, I want to do the thing that will get another good job, because that felt good. You know, that gave me a little dopamine boost. That felt nice. I felt validated. That grown-up said a nice thing to me, and I want them to keep saying the nice thing to me. So I'm going to keep doing the things that I believe will make them say the nice things again. And that might sound harmless in some ways, but then you have to think of it in terms of things like, you know, as Ken, you were saying, we don't know what the future looks like. We want our children to be willing to take risks and innovate and try things that have an uncertain outcome. It's hard to do that if what you're seeking is praise, because to get that praise, you want a reliable, predictable outcome. You want to do the thing you know you're good at, that you will do well, so someone will tell you you did a good job. If you want to be able to feel confident to take risks, and risks that might mean failing or learning or, you know, scaffolding step by step, getting a little bit better at a time, you have to be free to follow your intrinsic motivation. So that's one, you know, small but significant example of how a Montessori philosophy that was developed more than a century ago is still incredibly applicable and powerful in a modern sense. However, I know that when an educator comes into a Montessori classroom, especially if they have come from a mainstream background or a non-Montessori setting, if an educator walks into the classroom and you just say to them, you can't use praise, you can't say good job, you can't say good girl, you can't say good boy, that is very confronting, because it takes something away from them. And without explanation, that can seem pretty cold, right? You know, just saying, oh, we don't do praise here. That can seem pretty unfriendly. That can feel like, oh, hey, we're not giving the children this warmth and feedback and encouragement that they deserve and that they might need to kind of keep moving forward. So this is a really great example of those kind of four integrated elements that I talked about, of philosophy, practice, curriculum, and materials. You know, we can't just look at one in isolation without connecting it back to others, and particularly connecting it back to that philosophy. So not saying good job, that's a practice. You know, we don't use verbal praise. We don't do person-based praise specifically as a practice in this classroom, but you need to explain the why underlying that. You need to give that philosophy around protecting intrinsic motivation and not interfering with that by placing that sort of external adult judgment into the experience. So that philosophy is really important, but it's equally important for us to understand, and again, this is a bit of positive psychology coming in, the way that human beings function, our motivation even as adults, we are much better with an approach goal than an avoid goal. So when we're setting goals for ourselves, we want that goal to look like, I will do this, I am planning to do this, not I will avoid doing that, I will not do these things. Because the self-regulation it takes to not do something is a finite resource that depletes pretty quickly. And it's not a very motivating, joyful experience to spend a lot of time fixating on what you're trying to avoid doing. We achieve our goals much more effectively when we are thinking about them in terms of what I will do. So when an educator comes into a Montessori classroom, I don't think it's very helpful to them to say, don't do person-based praise, don't say good job, don't say good girl. I don't think that's a particularly helpful way to look at it. I think the best way to look at it is, in this classroom, we do process-based feedback. So we talk more about the child's efforts. We talk about things that we appreciate about what they did during that process. So they might come to you with a picture that they've just spent a long time drawing, and instead of just saying, oh, beautiful picture, you say, wow, I can see you worked so hard on that. You really spent a long time choosing your colors, And you can also express curiosity. It's not just about process-based feedback and appreciating that effort. It's also expressing your curiosity as an adult. Tell me about what you drew. What is it? Is there a story behind it? Is there something in your life? Are you feeling really proud of it? Putting that spotlight back onto the child's self-assessment. How do you feel about this? So I think it's much more valuable to give new practitioners those approach goals of these are the kind of things that you can say to still build that connection with that child, let them feel your enthusiasm and your warmth and your excitement about what they're doing, so they still feel very seen and validated by that interaction, but it's not interfering with their intrinsic motivation. And I think that aligns really beautifully with Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset. So, for anyone who's not familiar with her work yet, please go read about it. She's got some beautiful, TED Talks on YouTube that you can have a look at, because she talks very much about that importance of focusing on the process, not the person. And that's something that Montessori has been doing for a long time. We focus on, the way we phrase it is, we focus on the process, not the product. So again, that's an area where there is really beautiful alignment, and where understanding that Montessori philosophy in connection with modern research and understanding can really help us to see how the Montessori approach, despite being a century old, is still very relevant to the present and the future.
Yeah, no, I think that's such a great point, because I think as adults, we have, such a huge influence on shaping people's, motivation and their mindset to those things just by the words we use. And I think this again goes to the point of like how much is happening in child development and these interactions that you're all having on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's something I've also studied, this sort of side of thing. Another good sort of resource is achievement goal theory, very similar to what you're saying around this sort of mastery approach. And a lot of research shows that when you are just trying to be better than you were yesterday, you are going to improve your growth a lot faster than someone that is competing against an external benchmark. And I think a really good example that I often use to paint like this in an extreme setting is like, imagine if you went to a child and you said, they're starting to run 100 meters for the first time, maybe they're a bit older. You go, okay, well, this is Usain Bolt's world record. You need to try and get to that. And that's what you're comparing them to. Versus if you go, okay, you did this yesterday, this is what you're doing today. And that's where, like, if we're saying good job, like if it's 100-meter running, good job is Usain Bolt. That is the best. So if you're below that, you're not any good. But it's not about that. It's about cultivating that kind of internal growth. And I think that's awesome one that I know, educators that are new to a Montessori environment sometimes can struggle with. But I think when you know that why, like it really can change your whole life. Like I think, if I think about a lot of our systems that are past the early years, primary school, NAPLAN, HS, secondary school, high school certificates, or whatever you call it, which state you're in.
I'm so far out of high school, I can't even tell you what it's called. I know when I did my SACE, we got a TER. I don't think either of those terms are correct anymore.
Yeah. Well, in university, it's a mark against a benchmark of people. And I think that particularly, when I came into Mano, we're in a business that's evolving and growing. There aren't set benchmarks or outcomes when you're forming your own path in life. And I think the importance of that is not to be understated. I think it's such an important life skill. So thank you for sharing that. Also, I know we've got 10 minutes left. So I kind of wanted to allow a bit of time for audience Q&A. I have a couple other questions that I'm keen, but I just want to see if anyone in the audience has a few questions for Jess. Can you just pop it in the chat for us? And the other thing, just on Jess's point around, people that aren't coming into a new Montessori environment, educators start, wanting to understand that better, would love to just put up this little poll as well around what barriers do your team face in embedding Montessori and learning these things? What are you kind of seeing out there that for those that said they're still developing this practice, would love to kind of just get a pulse check on what people are finding too, and that can also help inform where we go. So feel free to, hopefully that's up on the screen, and I'm going to start the poll. That's why no one was responding. I was like, is this a bad question? That was a good question. Cool. So hopefully that's out. Yeah, cool. Interesting. Okay, training. Yep, great. And I'll just monitor the chat as well for any questions that sort of come through. And I guess while I'm just waiting for a couple of people, I might also be cheeky because we have, okay, a couple of questions here. Actually, let's go there. Do you have any suggestions for developing a more intentional and responsive Montessori outdoor environment? Good question from Savannah.
Absolutely, I do. I think first and foremost is keep your attitude the same as the educator wherever you are. So in Montessori, we talk about the kind of 3 factors that influence a child's learning, being the child themselves, of course, and then their prepared environment and the prepared adults, being the educator. So one of the things that is incredibly powerful as an educator is the mindset that we have. And even in really beautiful environments, even in spaces where Montessori is very deeply embedded, I can sometimes see in the educators the mindset shift that happens when they cross the threshold, that they go from their classroom practices, which are incredibly intentional and thoughtful, and they're very present with the children. Then they go outside and I can see them go into what I'd call supervision mode, where now that we're outside, what I'm doing is supervising these children, and I'm not necessarily engaging to that same depth and with the same degree of intentionality that I would inside. And I think that happens in mainstream settings as well as Montessori classrooms. It certainly happens in primary schools, and maybe that's a little bit of where we get that culture from, that there's a difference between being the teacher in the classroom and then being on yard duty when you go outside. So I think the biggest shift that we can make is to ensure that the adult maintains the same mindset, whether they've got a roof over their head or not. When you step into that outdoor environment, thinking of it with the same value and significance and importance as the classroom, when you understand that the child is learning just as much outside, that everything they're doing and experiencing out there is influencing who they are, who they're becoming, what they're capable of being. When you have that reverence for the outdoor environment, you can remain engaged. I understand that educators need a break too, and that sometimes I think the reason that you go into the outdoors with that different mindset might be because you're cognitively and emotionally exhausted from that time in the classroom too. But I think it's much better then to think about, well, maybe I need to step outside and I need to embrace the positive impacts of nature first. I need that to be restorative for me psychologically and emotionally, and have that deep breath and look at the horizon and hear the birds and enjoy being outside in the sun, hopefully, at least in some months of the year, being outside in the sunlight, or even feeling the wind or rain on my skin a little bit, and kind of get back into my body and ground myself. And now I can be present with those children again. And now I can view this outdoor environment as another opportunity for learning.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think as well, just had a quick question on the name of the book that you suggested. I know The Secret of Childhood was one, but you probably have a few.
Yes. So the 2 that I mentioned were The Secret of Childhood and The Montessori Method. Would I recommend them as a starting point? No. And maybe it's a little bit like sacrilegious for me to say that. Is this heresy? They are 2 incredible, powerful texts. Maria Montessori, as I mentioned earlier, she was a very eloquent orator. She gave very passionate speeches that were calls to action. She wrote incredibly well, but she wrote very formally. And again, remembering that this is language from the early 1900s, written in Italian, which was Maria Montessori's native language, and then translated into English and sort of updated a little bit over time. So some people going into The Secret of Childhood or the Montessori Method actually find them a bit off-putting because it's a bit much. And in fact, my copy of The Secret of Childhood even has that, like, those really thin pages. It was published so long ago that it's got the super thin paper that feels a little bit like a Bible. And so, you know, for some people, particularly those who maybe find Montessori a bit mystifying or overwhelming at first, I don't think those books are the absolute best gateways. I almost feel like I want to just start grabbing them off the shelf, but one that I would recommend, I'm going to do it.
This is it.
One that I would highly recommend is a book that is very poorly titled. The author of this book does not like this title, but it's called The Montessori Way, How to Raise an Amazing Child. So it is really incongruent with the way that we usually speak in Montessori, because we wouldn't talk about an amazing child, because we're not placing one child above another. The purpose of Montessori is not to make your child amazing. It's to help them be healthy and have a positive attitude towards learning and to be prepared for life. So it's not the best title, but it is an amazing book. It is very approachable. It is very engaging. It's an easy read, but a very authentic Montessori source. So I highly recommend that one as a starting point for educators and also for families, because it gives a really beautiful overview of the Montessori methodology and the kinds of practices that we engage with, our philosophy. It talks about the curriculum, it talks about the materials. So you're getting all of those 4 elements in one, but not in a way that feels overly heavy or dense. Sometimes Maria Montessori's writing can be a little bit dense. So I think that's probably where I'd start. I would recommend that people start with modern texts that talk about Montessori methodology. There's also, the science behind the genius is another amazing one for that talks about a lot of those links with modern research to kind of back up those prognostic instincts of Maria Montessori herself. So I would recommend starting there. Montessori Madness is another really fantastic one that's kind of written from the parent perspective of someone who was having that journey of, my child's in Montessori, I can see that this is great, but I don't really understand why, and starting to come to terms with that and then articulating it to other interested families. So I would suggest start with a modern book that's about Montessori. And then if you're still feeling really passionate, if you're wanting to go to that next level, then you go and engage with Maria's own source material, because it is incredible. I don't wish to denigrate it in any way. It is incredibly powerful and persuasive. And, when you're ready for it and you read those words, you feel so connected to something greater than yourself. It helps you understand and position yourself within the history of this approach and within this sense of contributing not just to individual child development, but also to social cohesion and to the mission of peace that Maria was so committed to as well. That she has this beautiful quote where she says, all that politics can do is keep us out of war. Lasting peace is the work of education. And it's so true. We have this capacity to foster a generation who are peaceful and respectful and inclusive. And in order to do that, we need to be very intentional. And then they grow up with what we've intentionally helped them to develop as their default setting, as their autopilot approach to the world. And that's where we start to see peace. So I think it is very valuable to engage with those Montessori texts. I would just say maybe not a light read at your bedside table in the evenings as a starting point. I'd go to one of those others to begin with.
That is such a powerful quote. I'm just going to look at it. Establishing lasting peace is the work of education. All politics can do is keep us out of war. And particularly, relevant in this day and age where we are seeing more fragmentation of society. And it just, I think, reinforces the role that we all play in society, and it's such a huge role. So that's a great point. And JR, our friend, also has recommended a book here, Montessori in Early Childhood by Susan Fez.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so thanks for sharing that, JR, as well.
It took me so long to put my headphones back in that I stopped myself from getting like 10 more from the shelf to be like, this one.
Yeah, I feel like we should start a book club.
Absolutely. Oh, let's do that.
Montessori book club next webinar. Yeah. Actually, what we are doing is a series of obviously a lot of different webinars. We have one coming up a little bit later on Reggio Emilia as well, as another big school of thought. Yeah. And so I know we probably don't have the time for this answer, but maybe a rapid fire. If you were to say,
not my strong suit.
Maybe you were to say within a sentence, or say 3 words. What are the key differences between Reggio and Montessori that I can then take to the next one? What would you say?
This is the greatest challenge anyone could ever give me, to be concise. What are you doing to me, Hayden? Can I do 3 quick sentences?
Yes.
That's as much as I can cull myself. I'm so sorry. I would say there are more similarities than differences, and we all benefit when we focus on those, so that there is not such a harsh transition and we can learn from each other.
Nice.
There is so much diversity within, not just between. So I think it's important for us to remember that, yes, there are core Montessori principles and there are fundamental Reggio approaches as well. But every Montessori classroom is different and every Reggio classroom is different. And we learn more when we look with that granularity rather than just at the umbrella term. In terms of differences, there are many within practice, but they both come from a place of absolute respect for the child. What I think Reggio does extraordinarily well is that it's very approachable to the adults. So I think where Montessori can learn as kind of a collective is Reggio has made itself very available to educators who want to learn bit by bit and pick things up incrementally and enrich their practice. So I would say, as kind of a final point, I know that wasn't really 3 sentences because I'm still talking, but I would say as kind of a final point, when you're in your own journey as a professional of developing your understanding of pedagogy and who you are, your identity, or finding your tribe, you need to understand that nobody is asking you to pick up one instrument that you have to play for the rest of your life and only that. You are writing a symphony, and you need to find all the pieces of that composition that harmonize with each other to build something that's really rich.
Love it. What a way to finish. That's so good. Well, just in the interest of time as well, just want to note in terms of our next kind of webinars coming up, we have our Mana Autumn product launch. And you can hear more about, I guess, how we really support pedagogy in practice. And that includes Montessori, Reggio. It's something we're very passionate about. So feel free to register to that. We'd love to kind of get your feedback and thoughts on what we're doing. And I will also pop up a little bit of a poll just around how satisfied you are with today's webinar, which really helps us where we're continuing to improve and want to continue to bring you great people like Jess today. So yeah, we're super grateful for your time, Jess. And I might just put this poll up in the back.
Oh, I have to watch the poll live. That's immediate feedback.
No, you don't.
Make sure it's process-based. Please give me some process-based feedback.
True, that would have been funny. No. So that's just for us. So yeah, this is I'll just go big thank you, Jess, so much for your time. Your passion is infectious. Definitely inspired from this. I think there's just so much awesome work that we do as educators, and thank you for advocating for us and for children and for a brighter future. And yeah, looking forward to seeing your symphony evolve as I know you're always curious and doing more things in positive psychology. And yeah, we're very grateful for your time and your energy today.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm sure I speak for the whole audience too, and just saying to you and the Mana team, thank you so much for injecting this positivity into the sector. You're right. It's a hard time at the moment in the early childhood sector. There's a lot going on in the media, changes in parents' expectations and feelings of security. So having Mana lead the way and saying, let's celebrate our practice. Let's be so proud of what we do and shout from the rooftops about all the beautiful parts of our work. I think that's incredibly restorative for our educators. So thank you.
Thank you. It takes 2 to tango, so we can do it right. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Go and keep changing children's lives for the better out there. And yeah, if you have any other feedback for us, feel free to write in. We're always keen to understand new ideas on things that add more value to what you guys are doing. So thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate your time. Okay. Beautiful.